The mountain doesn't argue. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care how prepared you are. It simply decides. On a blinding winter morning in February of 2026 near Lake Tahoe, 15 experienced backcountry skiers heard a single word slice through the silence. Avalanche! What followed was not a fight for survival so much as a race against inevitability. A wall of snow moving at highway speed, a shrinking pocket of air, and a cruel equation. 12 buried, 3 left to dig. In the end, even training, experience, and professional guidance wasn't enough to tip the balance. 9 lives were lost. And what remains is not just a tragedy, but a haunting question. When nature delivers its verdict in seconds, what, if anything, can humans truly control? This is their story. Welcome to That's Life, I Swear. This podcast is about life's happenings in this world that conjure up such words as intriguing, frightening, life-changing, inspiring, and more. I'm Rick Barron, your host. That said, here's the rest of this story. The moment one skier screamed the word, the fate of 15 people changed forever. That single shouting warning, avalanche, may have brought the group no more than a few seconds of awareness before a wall of snow moving at speeds approaching 100 miles per hour consumed everything in its path. What followed near Lake Tahoe in February of 2026 became the deadliest avalanche California had ever recorded, claiming 9 lives and leaving rescuers, scientists, and the broader outdoor community struggling with questions that the mountain itself may never fully answer. The sheer violence of an avalanche is difficult to comprehend until you study what it does to the human body and the landscape surrounding it. Snow, a substance most associated with childhood fun and quiet winter mornings, transforms under the right conditions into something almost unrecognizable, a crushing, suffocating force that buries everything in its path beneath frozen tonnage. The 15 skiers caught beneath Perry's Peak on February 17th encountered that force without mercy. When the snow finally settled, 3 skiers remained above the surface. 12 did not. What those 3 survivors faced in the immediate aftermath was not simply a rescue operation. No, it was a desperate, time-pressured confrontation with physics and biology. Avalanche experts are unambiguous about the window that exists between burial and death. We're talking roughly 10 minutes. After that, the odds of pulling someone out alive begin collapsing as rapidly as the snowpack that buried them. It's really difficult to even get one person out of the snow in 10 minutes, said Wendy Antibus, education coordinator for the Sierra Avalanche Center. With 12 people buried and only 3 individuals capable of responding, the arithmetic was brutal from the very moment. The 3 survivors would have immediately understood what needed to happen. First, a rapid assessment of whether further avalanche danger existed, because a second slide can and does kill rescuers who linger too long in a run-out zone. Then came urgent calls for outside help, using cell phones or satellite communication devices. And then, without hesitation, the search itself had to begin. Now, to locate the buried, the survivors would have switched their avalanche transceivers from transmit to receive mode, using the directional signals and estimated distances the beacons broadcast to close in on their companions. Collapsible probe poles followed, rigid, thin rods jabbed repeatedly into the snow to pinpoint a precise burial location before any digging could begin. Every step in that sequence takes time that avalanche victims cannot afford. This is all in seconds, said Robert Rice, an associate professor at UC Merced and a former avalanche forecaster, describing the mental and physical sprint that survival demands of everyone involved. The Sierra Avalanche Center's initial occurrence report confirmed that 3 of the buried skiers were successfully recovered by their companions before outside rescuers arrived. 3 lives pulled back from beneath the snow by hands and shovels and sheer will. But the scale of what remained, 9 more people still under the mountain, was beyond what 3 survivors with collapsible shovels could overcome, no matter how capable or composed they were. An avalanche does not simply bury a person the way sand buries a sandcastle. You see, it compresses, it consolidates. Snow in motion generates friction and heat, causing partial melting along its surface layers. Once the slide halts, that moisture refreezes, transforming loose powder into something far closer to concrete than anything that falls gently from the sky. Digging through it is a physical battle. The shovels skiers carry are sturdy, Wendy said, but the act of excavating a buried person can be extremely exhausting, and exhaustion is the enemy of speed. For those entombed beneath the surface, the experience was one of compounding physiological terror. The avalanche's violence alone, its twisting, tumbling, blunt force momentum, can kill before the snow even stops moving. You may just die of trauma before you even stop moving, said Andy Anderson, an avalanche forecaster with the Tahoe National Forest Sierra Avalanche Center. But if you survive the ride, then you have some air, and as you breathe, you create a mask of ice around your face, which then limits the amount of air you have, and you end up rebreathing carbon dioxide and then being deprived of air. Survival in the burial zone is measured not in hours, but in exhales. Every breath a buried person draws depletes the small air pocket around them and replaces it with carbon dioxide. The mountain is patient. It does not hurry. It simply waits while oxygen turns into poison. Now, the group had been returning from a 3-day excursion to the remote Frog Lake huts when the slide struck at approximately 11:30 a.m. in the morning. Near whiteout conditions made the terrain especially dangerous for the rescue teams who eventually reached the scene that evening, discovering 6 survivors. The original 3 plus the 3 that they had managed to pull from the snow, alongside the remains of 3 victims the survivors had been able to locate. Severe weather and ongoing avalanche hazard prevented recovery operations for the remaining victims for several days. The bodies of all 9 victims were recovered on a Friday and Saturday following deliberate avalanche mitigation work. 6 of the 9 were women, described by their families as accomplished skiers whose bond had been forged through a shared devotion to the outdoors. Now, the remaining 3 were professional guides employed by Blackbird Mountain Guides, the outfitter that led the expedition. Now, investigators later determined that the slide measured approximately 400 feet and was classified as a soft slab avalanche, a type typically composed of recently fallen, less consolidated snow. Now, Robert Rice explained that such an event involves either the fresh snow itself releasing or a weaker structural layer buried beneath it giving way and sending everything above it downslope. The slope beneath Perry's Peak, a steep eastern face of Castle Peak, scattered with trees except where the white face opens up, provided exactly the terrain geometry that allows slides of this nature to form and accelerate. On the classification scale for destructive potential, the slide was rated 2.5, straddling the range between a Class 2 event capable of burying people entirely and a Class 3 capable of destroying structures or cutting down trees. Now, this is a small enough area and probably the visibility was bad that day, Wendy said. I doubt they had very much time to react. Maybe they heard a noise and then all of a sudden there's an avalanche there. Now, that description encapsulates one of the most disorienting truths about avalanche danger. The warning and the catastrophe often arrive as a single event. There is no graceful interval in which to deliberate or reposition. The mountain presents its verdict and executes it at the same time. Backcountry guides in the United States are evaluated at a minimum on their ability to locate and excavate 2 buried transceivers within 7 minutes. Now, most experienced skiers on guided trips will have completed at some level of avalanche education and practice rescue scenarios as a group early in their journey. This group almost certainly had. The guides leading them were professionals. The skiers themselves were described as highly skilled. Now, none of this was enough to change the ratio. 12 people under the snow, 3 people above it. Now, the investigation into what happened continues. The Nevada County Sheriff's Office and California's Division of Occupational Safety and Health are each conducting independent inquiries. Now, what evidence was there might have been providing some good information, but it was later erased by more snow. Continued storms buried the avalanche zone beneath fresh snow in the days that followed, obscuring the layered snowpack profile that would have revealed precisely which structural failure triggered the slide. You know, it kept storming for a few days after the avalanche, and so all of that stuff has been buried by new snow and no longer exists, basically, Andy Anderson said. We can't tell which layer broke. It just filled back in with snow. No pre-avalanche photographs of the slope exists. The pit profile, the cross-sectional examination of the snowpack that would have identified the weak layer responsible, was washed away before anyone could study it. Now, what remains beyond grief and unanswered questions is a reckoning with what this tragedy exposes about wilderness travel at its most unforgiving. These were not casual weekend visitors who wandered carelessly into a hazardous terrain. No, they were experienced, equipped, guided, and trained. They operated within the norms of responsible backcountry recreation, and the mountain consumed them anyway. An avalanche does not evaluate credentials before releasing. It does not distinguish between a first-time skier and a seasonal guide. It does not slow for good intentions or pause to consider preparation. I mean, when the snowpack fractures and that slab begins its descent, it becomes one of nature's most indiscriminate forces. Fast, heavy, cold, and completely indifferent to everything beneath it. Now, the survivors of this catastrophe managed to save 3 lives in the immediate chaos that followed. That represents genuine courage enacted under extreme duress. But the mountain's toll, 9 people who went into the backcountry on a clear trip and did not return, stands as a sobering reminder that in the wilderness, risk is never fully negotiated away. It is only ever borrowed against. The storm that buried the evidence has moved on. The mountain remains. Now, what can we learn from the story? What's the takeaway? This story teaches us one thing. Risk can be managed, but never eliminated. For anyone drawn to wild places, the lesson isn't to stay away, but to carry a healthy humility. The mountains don't negotiate. They don't care how skilled you are, how prepared you feel, or how many times you've done it before. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is this. Survival can come down to seconds, positioning, and sheer chance. Well, there you go, my friends. That's life, I swear. For further information regarding the material covered in this episode, I invite you to visit my website, which can be found on Apple Podcasts, for show notes and the episode transcript. As always, I thank you for the privilege of you listening and your interest. Be sure to subscribe here or wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you soon